a generation.
Right.
And when you're in a condo, no kids. So one child, is that part of it? Absolutely.
Yep.
But one child is the secondary factor in the Chinese demographic collapse. The single biggest one is that they all moved into small condos in a very short period of time, and everyone just stopped having kids altogether.
Yeah.
So we know now that China will cease to exist as a functional demographic structure and economy this decade, because it's not just that they ran out of children. That was 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're now running out of 30-somethings. Part of the reason why the baby boomers think they're so important is because they have been, and they still are. I mean, in the late 60s to the early 80s, they were coming of age. They drove consumption. That's why we had inflation then. Yeah. In the 90s and into the 2000s.
Peter Zeihan is a geopolitical strategist and author known for his insights into global geopolitical and economic trends. He analyzes and predicts international developments, particularly focusing on how geography, demographics, and political factors influence the world's dynamics. Zeihan's work often touches on topics such as population demographics, energy resources, and military power, providing valuable insights into the evolving landscape of international relations and its impact on economics and geopolitics. Peter Zeihan discusses the demographic and economic challenges faced by both the United States and China in the context of aging populations and changing investment behaviors. China is dealing with a demographic collapse due to a decline in birth rates and a shift to smaller living spaces, while the United States is grappling with a labor shortage as the baby boomer generation retires. This labor shortage is compounded by a simultaneous capital shortage. The unique challenges in China, such as demographic shifts and energy supply dependency, make it an interesting backdrop for global economic changes. Before we do, if you want more videos like this, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more updates. Thank you and enjoy the video.
They had come out of their consumption phase. They were saving for retirement. That's why we had investment booms. Right. And now our inflation, it's because they're all retiring. And we have a large generation that's just going away. And now, yes, as you age, your net worth increases. And as you age, you become more adventurous with your investments, and that drives more economic activity. And then when you retire, you cash it all and go to T-bills because you won't be able to stomach any sort of market turning or currency turning. That's been true since the dawn of recorded history. There's nothing new there. What is new is the demographic profile has changed. So in a pre-industrial world, you had very few 60-somethings. You had more 50-somethings and yet more 40-somethings and on down. It built a pyramid. What industrialization and urbanization has done is change the shape of the pyramid. In some countries like the United States, it's more or less a chimney, but with a bulge for the baby boomers. Mm-hmm. And some like Germany, it's a diamond. Yeah. With more people in their 50s than their 40s than their 30s than their 20s, and then narrowing up as you would expect at the top. What's happening globally right now, not just with the American boomers, is that we've got this big cadre of people in their 60s who are moving into retirement, and they are a bulge in the structure. So instead of just a small group of people relative to the overpopulation that are moving on and changing their investment portfolios, we have the single largest generation in our history doing that. And on average, they will have completed that transition by the end of this year. So we go from having some of the richest, most liberal, most open, most liquid capital markets we've ever known to something that's a lot closer to the opposite in less than a year. Yeah, that's right. Why most people don't do that. I agree that there's a percentage of people that are, and that is unfortunate. Right. And we're about to learn that good and hard, because we're not just having this demographic turning, we're of course at the market tightening at the same time, and that's just damnably inconvenient. It's some ridiculous number.
It's big, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the problem here is we're losing the single largest worker cadre we've ever had, and the replacement generation down at the bottom of that pyramid, the Zoomers, they are the smallest generation we have ever had. Well, Gen X and millennials have been in the labor market already. So we're already factored into the math. Now, there's pros and there's cons, and that shapes a lot of things, but we are already in. The Zoomers are the ones who are coming in to replace the boomers. Okay. And we have our largest generation going out, our smallest generation coming in. So right now, annually, that's 400,000 worker shortage. And that will increase every year until 2034, when it'll peak at 900,000. These people are already born. They're already on the way. We know exactly what's going to happen to the net flows each and every year moving forward. The problem is that capital is going away at the same time. I certainly agree that the relationships are going to change. I think it's a little bit arrogant to think that I know exactly how. But we're definitely entering a period of protracted and extended and increasing labor shortage. At the same time, we're entering into a period of protracted and extended and increasing capital shortage.
Okay.
And just to make it a little bit more fun, China's collapsing against this backdrop. So even if we decided we were fine with a completely globalized supply chain, we still need to double the size of the industrial plant in the next few years with less capital and with less labor. I would argue that at the moment, the labor disconnect is the single largest issue behind our inflation numbers right now. Well, the baby boomers at the height of their earning experience, and as of the end of next year, this year, they won't be earning anymore. So the net inflows into the system from just normal demographic structure dry up considerably. The next generation down, Gen X, is very small. And even if we do succeed in having significant raises now in this labor inflationary environment, there aren't enough of us to generate nearly as much in total. So step one, we're losing volume. Step two, we're losing investment quality, because in the flight from risk on to risk off, the capital becomes a lot less interesting. Sure, this is going to be broadly decent for people who want to be in the government and borrow, because that's the T-bill. That's considered the ultimate gold standard. And to a degree, that helps with the mortgage market as well, because mortgage rates primarily draw their guidance from the 10-year as opposed to interest rate levels. After that, though, you're entirely dependent on capital flight from the rest of the world. Now, I think that'll be robust, but I also think that'll be wildly inconsistent depending on what's going on in the United States versus wherever else the capital might be. This is still the deepest, most liquid market in the world. It's denominated in the sole source of global store of value. It is the only meaningful method of exchange for international transport and trade. And the Japanese and the Europeans have basically signed on to a US dollar denominated system as part of the deal that generated the sanctions against the Russian central bank a couple of months ago. So if you're going to benefit from this in any way, the US dollar is the place to be, but you can't predict the inflows year on year of what's coming in from the European space or the Asian space. It will come when they're in trouble and we look good, and it will probably never go back. And so we know that the capital supply has to drop domestically, and we know we're going to get these bursts of capital from abroad. But planning on that, that takes a smarter brain than I have. And the millennials themselves will then be entering their late stage worker years. Well, they will gradually become the dominant capital providing class again. So for the United States, we have a pretty big needle to pass through here. And a roughly 10 to 20 years, it can be a little loosey-goosey based on what happens with the monetary system and the Fed in that time. But in that decade of time, the United States will go back to having what we would consider a more stable capital structure. And at the same time, when you get into the 2040s, the labor market will start reconstituting based on normal demographic factors, because the millennials' kids will then be entering the workforce. We'll be through this long winter of the Zoomers. But no one else gets to do that. Everyone else went through industrialization and urbanization either faster or more intensely than the United States did. A couple exceptions, but only a couple. And so for them, they're looking at labor markets getting smaller every year and the capital supply getting smaller every year. And still in this decade, their advanced worker cadre, that big, giant last generation, moves into retirement. So their need for government spending to keep those people alive skyrockets and never drops.
And that is very problematic for...
The Chinese will throw a bottomless supply of capital against anything in order to make sure that people have jobs. It doesn't matter if there's a product on the back end, really, as long as the people are working. So everything that people say about the U.S. Fed is actually true to an order of magnitude higher in China. So the U.S. dollar is the global currency. It's the medium of exchange. It's the store of value. It's the lubricant for the number one economy and 2/3 of the top 20. The yuan is used just in China. It's not internationally traded, and they regularly expand their money supply by 5 times as much as we do. And at most times in the last 10 years, the yuan supply has been twice that of the US dollar, even though it's just not exchanged at all. So their financial system is its own thing. And to think that this is going to continue in perpetuity is being really creative with your math. They get their energy from a continental way. They don't have a navy that's capable of making that far in force in order to secure their own supply lines. So China is the country most dependent upon the U.S. Navy to keep the lights on.